This is St. Petersburg Academy of Arts. It's a school where I went to and majored in painting, and my husband went to and majored in architecture. It is situated on the University Embankment, because further down there is university, or original university. It has now been moved largely to a more spacious site. And here is the Neva River, St. Isaac Cathedral on the other side, and one of famous St. Petersburg bridges. All of them are drawbridges. I'm going to walk towards the steps down. They're famous granite embankments in St. Petersburg. And these two sculptures here, one of many sphinx produced in Egypt thousands of years ago. And the signage says Sphinx from the ancient Fifths in Egypt was moved to the city of St. Peter in 1832. The steps down, there are many of those, then they're all different. And on the other side, beyond this river craft, where you can take a tour of the Neva River and see the city from the water, right there is the Winter Palace. Also, the Hermitage Museum will make their way there soon. The building to the left, it's a former residence of the Roman of Tsars, the Winter Palace, built in mid-18th century. The Alexander Column in the back was built in the first third of the 19th century. The interesting thing about it is that it's one single piece of granite that was erected probably before 1830 with that time technology. Palace Square, Winter Palace, also the Hermitage Museum. That's the Alexander Column. And since there is no traffic here, it's fully pedestrian. People are just sitting here having fun. Here is some kind of performer who arrived clearly on his bicycle. To the left is the General Military Headquarters from the early 19th century. And then this is prepared for the celebration of the Scarlet Sails. Anyone who's interested to look up what Scarlet Sails is, YouTube, you can get professional videos and amateur videos from previous years. I'm going to walk towards the Alexander Column, which is humongous. You could see people at the bottom of it to give you scale. And as I said, the amazing thing about this is this whole thing was built out of a single piece of granite and erected in around 1830. The signage says to Alexander I from Grateful Russia. 1812, the French crossed the Russian border and ended up in Moscow. Moscow burned partially, and then they retreated and were soundly defeated. Russian military, along with their allies, the Prussians, the Austrians, and the British, ended up in Paris. And then that Alexander Column was built to celebrate the defeat of Napoleon. St. Petersburg has a lot of big rivers, mostly different branches of the Neva. Big Neva, small Neva, and then it also has little rivers. This one is called Moika. It's a very charming part of St. Petersburg. Almost all the buildings around are late 18th, early 19th century, with an occasional building that's a little younger. Russians call this iron lace. Every bridge has its own ironwork, unlike any other. All that craft in the back is touristy craft. You can either rent or be part of a bigger cruise. We're planning to do that. We now left the Palace Square, the Alexander Column. This is a very wide bridge, and it was built this wide. It's original size. Oh, now this big craft is trying to fit under the very small bridge, and I suppose it will, because I'm sure it's not the first time they're doing so. Who could believe a traffic jam on Moika River? So now he fit under that little granite bridge. The other ones are going to follow. All the buildings around, by the way, are brick and they're covered in plaster. St. Petersburg always had these pastel colors. That's the feature. And apparently this one fit much easier. There is a series of low little bridges, and then at the end where we have this arch, that's where it hits the Neva River, and suddenly they emerge from the little river into a really big one. And the building over that arch, it's Hermitage Museum. The Winter Palace is only part of the museum. It actually extends several blocks, reportedly the largest museum in the world. It's actually, I think, 8 p.m. and we're here during the white nights, so the sun will be here until 10. You get side light. It's very, very beautiful. Under my feet is the original sidewalk from granite created during the times of Catherine the Great. And here are these very big granite gentlemen. People like to touch these feet and toes. Oh, here we go. They're cute. Are they not? Very large toenails. Look at that. Everyone who walks around wants to touch them. Winter Palace in the back. Isaac Cathedral behind that. In this yellow building lived Russian poet Alexander Pushkin, who wrote the original poem Eugene Onegin, after which Tchaikovsky wrote an opera. He also wrote the Queen of Spades. Poetry is hard to translate, but at least these two pieces are quite well known. Oh, Boris Godunov, Mussorgsky opera also is based upon Pushkin's poetry. He was mortally wounded on a duel. Honor was a big deal, and 2 days after he was mortally wounded in 1836. Pushkin saw the Alexander Column being erected and wrote a very famous piece saying in verse a non-handmade monument to himself with his verses, and claiming that it is rising taller than the Alexander Column, which is probably very much true. When I look at this building, I know it's someone else's mansion, built, I'm guessing, late 18th, early 19th century. And then on the other side, these buildings are apartment buildings, very extensive apartment buildings, because of their proximity to the Tsar's palace. More beautiful little bridges. This fellow is trying to sell tours. More ironwork, and it was gilded. In the back, one can see a spire of Mikhailovsky Castle, That's a place that Tsar Paul built for himself. He was quite a character and was very concerned about his safety, so he built himself a castle surrounded by little rivers and then was strangled in his own palace by his own bodyguards. And then after that, no other royal ever lived in that castle. It became a place for military engineers, so it was called Engineering Castle. Another bridge. The sun is very low and will continue to be that way. So it creates this very special kind of lighting that you can get in a northern city. The interesting thing here is that this bridge, it's a 3-arch bridge over 3 little rivers. And in the back is a cathedral built on blood. That's a place where Tsar Alexander II was killed by the anarchists. And interestingly, that's the Tsar who abolished serfdom, I believe in 1861, had a very ambitious program of reforms for Russia, creating essentially more of a capitalist society with his reforms. But once the freedom came, it also came with revolutionaries and anarchists, and they pursued him relentlessly, and eventually they succeeded. When the bomb was thrown, he wasn't wounded, but some aides were. He stepped out to help, and that's when the other bomb was thrown. And he was delivered to the Winter Palace, which is only 5 minutes away, in a carriage, and where he bled to death. Wonderful afternoon. Tons of people enjoying Saturday evening stroll. As we edited the video, we got fascinated by the engineering feat of erecting a 600-ton column in 1832.
The Alexander Column is the tallest column in the world made of monolithic granite. The construction of the monument was entrusted to Montferrand, a French classicist architect who worked in Russia since 1816. Montferrand worked on the St. Isaac's Cathedral since 1818, which gave him a wealth of experience in producing and installing enormous monolithic granite columns. His experience with the columns of St. Isaac's persuaded Tsar Nicholas I, who approved the project of the Alexander Column in December 1829. The 600 metric ton column was carved out of finished rocks more than 100 nautical miles from St. Petersburg. Carving took a year and a half. 250 people worked on it daily. 1,250 pine 6-meter piles were driven under the foundation. A 400-ton monolith was brought from the quarry to serve as the base of the pedestal. By summer 1832, the pedestal was completed. A specially designed barge with a lifting capacity of over 1,000 tons transported the column monolith to the city from Finland. The loading nearly ended in catastrophe, though. The weight of the column could not be supported by the beams, and it almost fell into the water. This was corrected with the help of 300 workers and 600 soldiers. The column was towed by 2 steamships to the Palace Embankment of St. Petersburg by July 1, 1832. Using the experience gained on the installation of the columns of St. Isaac's Cathedral, a lifting system had been designed. On August 30, 1832, crowds gathering to watch the raising of the stone occupied the entire square. To bring the column into a vertical position took 2,000 soldiers and 400 workers. It took another 2 years to finish polishing, secure the bas-relief slabs and decorative elements to the pedestal, and install the sculpture at the top. A military parade took place at the opening of the column in 1834. The structure inspired awe in St. Petersburg, but still the residents were afraid that it would collapse. The granite column and the bronze angel at the top are held solely by their own weight. After almost 200 years, wars and revolutions passed, and the column still stands. The architect was not mistaken.